Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Stephanie Boozer, and I'm with CUGC HQ. I am so happy to welcome you to today's CUGC Connect webinar with Login VSI. I know we're going to be talking about a very popular topic today, Windows Virtual Desktop, and getting lots of great insights. But before we do, we released a poll while you were out in the waiting room and asking you just for fun, what's on your feet right now? So I'm going to share those results. And it looks like there's a good running for nothing. So a lot of you are barefoot and a lot of you just have on socks. And I actually just have on socks myself. And hardly anyone has on sandals, but someone does. And then it's slippers and some people are wearing shoes. So good for you guys. All right, before we dive into everything today, I have a couple of housekeeping details for you. We are, first of all, recording this webinar, so if you miss anything or you have to hop off, we will send you a link to today's recording. You'll get that in an email that will come from GoToWebinar, so be on the lookout for that. That'll come tomorrow when the recording is all ready. So like I said, GoToWebinar, it won't come from me or CUGC. Submit your questions in the question panel. You can put those in anytime during the presentation. We're going to save those for the end, but I do want you to type those questions in as you have them so you don't forget, and we'll have someone taking a look at those. Also, when we wrap up today, I have a very quick survey for you. It's anonymous, it's super short, but we just like to get your feedback on our webinars. All right, so I'm going to introduce you to Bas Stapelbroek. He said if I said his name correctly, he would say hello to you, and I hope I did. Bas is
You did
going...
fine. Yeah, my name is Bas Stapelbroek from the Netherlands, Citrix Technology Advocate in 2020, my first CTA award. I work as a solution architect and happy to answer all your questions today. And let's go ahead, Blair.
All right.
Fantastic.
Thank you. So, yep, with us today from Login VSI is Blair Parkhill. He's the Director of Products, and I know you guys are all really interested in what he has to say, so I am not going to hold things up any longer. Blair, I am sending the screen controls over to you right now.
That's great. Thanks, Stephanie. And I will accept that screen handling and share. And so everybody should see my my slide right now. If you can confirm, then I can get going.
Yep, I see it.
Sweet. Yep. All right. Well, welcome everybody. I see we have a very healthy, grouping of people here. So thanks for joining us. Today's topic is Windows Virtual Desktop, and Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session is a particular focus here. I've been doing quite a bit of testing on this platform over the last 6 months, and would like to share some of the early findings that I've been able to kind of discover on my own and with the help of many others. So, and also this is the kind of work that will continue to live on, and so the information that I'm giving you today will certainly be alive and living and changing on a regular basis. So I encourage you to stick around and throughout the year as we come up with new findings and things like that. We'd be happy to share those with you. So first of all, I'm coming to you from my work from home space. This is actually a picture of my cooperative workspace. I am in Costa Rica. Came down here to have a little vacation and start building a house. And I was supposed to go home about 3 weeks ago, but because the pandemic is not very, very large here, it's proven to be a much safer spot. So we're sticking around. So I will apologize in advance if you hear monkeys in the background or motorcycles going up and down the jungle roads. It shouldn't be too loud. And actually, if you hear it, it's kind of funny. The monkeys can be rather vocal. And like many of you, you probably haven't been able to get a haircut in a while, so that clean cut guy that you saw on the invitation is now a bearded guy with long hair. So I don't know how long it's going to be until I'll be able to get back to my my hairstylist, but until then, I'll just continue to put on the happy face. So there's a couple of reasons why we wanted to jump into the Windows 10 enterprise multi-session testing. Number one is because we just love to break things. And with any new technology, there are a lot of opportunities to break things. And we also like to learn, and test these types of things. And Windows 10 enterprise multi-session is certainly one of them. At Login VSI 2, we focus a lot of our efforts on the hype. So what is our market saying? What are they focused on? And clearly, this is a very important topic for many of you, considering how many people registered and how many people have actually showed up for this webinar. So we like to stay on top of that, and we'll continue to do that as this continues to be a very hot topic. And as with anything new, not only is it a hot topic, but there are opportunities to learn about how things can be completely different than what we might expect. And Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session is certainly no exception. It is very different, very new, and I'd like to cover some of that with you, some of the expectations we may have about remote desktop service hosts. So we'll take a look at that a little deeper. You might also know that Windows Virtual Desktop isn't just Windows 10, right? It's Windows 7, it's a couple server variants. So while there are different operating systems that are available and just Windows 10, individual, through speaking with my Microsoft folks, 95% of all WVD instances and images are Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session. How about that? So people are looking for alternatives to multi-session hosts. But 95% surely speaks to what they've built that kind of hits a high interest in the market. So pretty cool. The other reason why we're doing this is because Microsoft is also curious about the performance of this server-based compute type of solution. So they've been working with us pretty closely, and it's been a wonderful time collaborating with them. And anytime where there's a lot to learn, we're always hopping on that. I personally love to learn about things new, and this is, again, no exception. So a lot of cool stuff going on here with Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session. So before I jump in, this is something that I would love to know from each of you. And Stephanie, if you could fire off our poll on, are you doing Windows Virtual Desktop? And that can be a number of different ways. As you're not interested, so you're not considering it, you are researching, you started the testing, you've actually started deploying, or you're already using it. So after Stephanie sees some of the voting subside, then she'll read us the results real quick.
Oh, and it looks
and I'll
like
take a drink of coffee.
it looks like about half have voted, so we'll give it just another few seconds here. All right, I think that's good. And I'm going to share the results and just confirm, Blair, I think you can't see this share. I mean, you can or
Well,
can't?
I can see them actually. Yeah, I can.
Okay.
So 61% are researching. That's fantastic. I mean, this goes with everything that we've heard and seen, and we know that management in a lot of the enterprises that we're working with is encouraging their IT staff to strongly consider WVD, or at least take a look. So it looks like a lot of you are in the same boat. 61% are researching. And then the next highest is you've started testing at 17%, and you already use it at 14%. So that's pretty cool. Good to see that that spread on the Windows Virtual Desktop. So thanks, Stephanie. That was fun. So what did we test? We tested, again, Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session. I tested version 1903. So that's the March 2019 version of Windows 10 plus Office Pro Plus. But because of the way that they license Office on Office 365 and Activate, it makes it tough for us to do testing on that. And that's something we're working on right now with Microsoft. So I did have to substitute Office 365 with Office 2019 Standard. I used a volume license key to be able to license my virtual users, and this helped considerably with the testing. Again, we'll work on the Pro Plus licensing thing and see if we can't provide you with a little information on how to make that work. But otherwise, this is a way to go. Now, we were asked to test some of the NVIDIA-enabled NV series instances, and also the D series, the general purpose series of the Windows, the Azure instances that we can use with Windows. Pretty much the testing that we did exclusively focused on the D16 SV3. And it's important to consider that because number one, we needed a premium SSD. Anytime you're doing server-based compute or VDI, storage is certainly, you know, a top consideration. You got to have the fastest you can get. And then V3 refers to the processor version. So you want to take the latest and greatest, as we've seen with, you know, Intel processor vulnerabilities and mitigations. It tends to hit the older generation processors harder, and any VDI solution works great with the latest and greatest processor architectures. So it'll be interesting to see with some of the new ones coming out, how that is handled. So there isn't any NV series information in this presentation, but I will be doing some testing on that very shortly. And then lastly, we use the VMware Fling, the OS optimization tool. And I optimized this image pretty heavily using that tool. There is a couple of things that I did differently than just picking the base 1903 optimizations, and that is leaving Cortana and OneDrive enabled. These are kind of essential functions within the Windows 10 operating system and something that Microsoft doesn't support disabling. So we kept those enabled. So I didn't accept those changes in the OSOT. Okay, let's take a look how we tested. So those of you that know about Login VSI know that we have the classic Login VSI benchmark testing software. And that's how we tested it this time. And I'll be careful to say this time, because I don't expect that we'll be doing any more testing with the Login VSI, you know, proper product. But we'll take you through that here in a little bit. There's also some continuous testing that we did with a legacy product called Login PI. And Login PI is just, it uses the same virtual user technology, but it does continuous testing. So that's 24/7/365. So we can take a look at how those Azure instances respond over time and under pressure from the world market. Now, Login PI just recently went through a branding update and quite a, you know, a feature update. And we now call that product Login Enterprise. And this is going to be our benchmark product moving forward. It will have all use cases built into it. So our next testing will not be on Login VSI, however, it will be using the Login Enterprise product. I'll give you a peek at that here in a little bit. So we have this capacity testing, continuous testing. We also picked up, oh my. I don't know if that was a question or somebody that just needs to be muted, but thank you. And then we have application compatibility. Application compatibility is another test case. Again, I'll show that to you real quick, but basically, our platform now is Login Enterprise. You'll see us talk about this quite a bit, and it can do all three of these use cases. Let's take a quick look at the architecture that I used in Azure to do this testing. I had a Login VSI management server set up on a D2 SV3. You can see the specs here. So that basically controls the test itself and takes some of the data and puts that into a report. We have the launchers that are the session. They basically launch the sessions to the target system. We had 3 of those. They were the simple DS1 V2s. And then we had the multi-session host, which again was the D16 SV3. You can kind of get the pattern here, right, with the processors and processor version. And then you can see how much memory was for each. So it's a pretty straightforward system. One thing to note is that all of these systems were on the same Azure Virtual Network. So I wasn't really going through any brokers or anything. I was making a direct RDP connection to that multi-session host in this test. And then lastly, we also had Active Directory domain services in this network, which we used. And in our next test, we'll use the Azure Active Directory. So that's a simple setup for the architecture. Some of the things we were looking at were baseline. So that's basically for the Windows 10 you know, session host image that we were using. A baseline gives us a feel for how fast that image is in its best conditions, right? It's kind of like getting a computer out of the box for the first time and being amazed at how fast it is. But as things change, it tends to slow down, right? That baseline is that best potential of the system. We have VSImax, which basically just says what is the performance like as we put it under a heavy load and fill it up to capacity. Login performance is definitely you know, a key criteria because as the system gets busier, it takes us longer to log into that. We have lots of data on that. Profile performance, which is looking at when I have to create a new profile for the system as I do a first-time login. How is that different from established users or persistent images? And then lastly, we'll take a quick peek at disk I/O to have a look at what that looks like in this type of environment. Okay, so looking at what we had in front of us, if you guys are familiar with Nick Rintalon's rule of 5 and 10, then you might think, okay, if I have 16 cores in this server, in this virtual machine, if I use the rule of 5 and 10, 10 being how many server-based compute sessions can I get per core, then that would say we could, get somewhere around 160 on a finely tuned image, right? And 160 sessions was definitely not what we got here. And this is where kind of Windows Virtual Desktop and Azure kind of take a little turn in terms of what to expect on these types of systems. So basically, we had a lot of testing to do, and I'm not going to cover all of this detail in this data. I don't even expect you to read through it. I'll give you the summaries. Just suffice it to say, we did a lot of testing on this to find that sweet spot, and we'll give you some new sizing rules moving forward. Now, while we did test up to 160 and did consider the rule of 5 and 10, again, I'm going to show you what we kind of came up with for a new scaling factor. Okay, let's take a look at the baseline performance in the VSImax. So after optimizing any Windows image, it's certainly going to be faster and snappier than a non-optimized system. And as I spoke before, OneDrive and Cortana remained enabled. And you can see the difference between, when I show you some numbers, you'll be able to see the difference between a non-optimized image versus an optimized image. And then there's another function in Windows 10 that is called app readiness. This is basically the Windows client operating system trying to prepare that environment for you ahead of time. Now, when it's doing that, that's great for a single user, but there are a lot of processes that go behind making that happen. So Microsoft helped me to understand how to suppress that, and we'll cover that a little more exactly what that is. But we suppress that to kind of keep down the CPU utilization here. And then the best VSImax also came after it was optimized, and we did make sure that multi-user OneDrive was enabled. So it's basically turning a OneDrive into a per machine type of instance versus a per user. That also cuts down on some of the CPU. So looking at the baselines, you can see, and baseline is basically an indexed measurement of how snappy the system is again. And that's the unit of measure here is milliseconds, right? So if you look at the fastest we could get that image, it was just a little over 1 second in terms of how we kind of categorize the performance of this system. And again, this is an indexed value that we create ourselves here at Login VSI. So the baseline is pretty good, and if you look at the difference between a non-optimized and an optimized image, you can see that we basically cut a full second of responsiveness out of that, which is really good. Typically in enterprise environments, we try and keep any customer system below 2 seconds when it comes to our indexed measurements. And here you can see we're even non-optimized, we're underneath that. And I particularly find this interesting because the non-optimized versus the optimized is that gap is not as big as we've seen in the past. So Microsoft has definitely been doing things to optimize their images also. So interesting thing to find. Now, when we did look at the system and did test it, we found that we got our sweet spot, and basically when is performance good versus when is performance starting to taper off. And that range was between 40 and 60. So doing multiple tests, we found that 40 sessions to 60 sessions was about that place where we wanted to focus our attention. And then when we tested VSImax, so this is max saturation of the system, you can see that there's some of those numbers showing up, 47 and 46. So let's just say that 47 was the first number that we got out of there. And if you compare that to the rule of 5 and 10, that's 160 sessions that we would expect from a bare metal machine compared to 47, which is more of the virtual machine in Azure. So already you're starting to see there's a huge difference here. And I'm not saying that's a bad number by any means either. Azure is a very different beast than bare metal. So we're basically having to come up with some different guidance here on what to expect and how to treat it. Another thing we looked at was login performance. It's also a good indicator of how saturated or how much CPU is being used on these session hosts. And we see that building a new profile, any of these client OS startup processes, and even layering technologies, while we didn't have these in there, they tend to be a good indicator of how performant the system is when we look at login performance. So I could see that as we went from 50 sessions per host up to 65, you can see that login performance really started to taper off again here around that 60 number, right? So if I'm looking at the system, I'm probably going to say that somewhere between that 47 number for VSImax and the 55 number represents my sweet spot for the system. and an area that I'm going to kind of, you know, point my spotlight on and really focus on a lot of the testing that I do. Okay, so hopefully so far this information has been pretty helpful for you, and you kind of are starting to understand the system here. Another thing I wanted to look at was what's the difference between logging in a user for the first time on the session host versus letting them have a persistent profile on that session host. Remember, we're dealing with a client OS, not a server OS. And client operating systems will do a lot more to prepare that environment for, you know, their users logging in. This is great if you're, again, a single user on that system, but when you have anywhere between, you know, 47 and 55 users on the system, then it's trying to prepare that environment for all of them as they're logging in. So I wanted to see what that looks like for a new user versus an existing user. And I used a task user workload in this. This is a lighter load. It allows me to get more users per session or per session host. So this is the only time I use these lighter weight users because I want to get, again, more of these users. I could see that when I was creating all of these new users at the same time, so basically every login creates a new profile and goes through these startup services, I could only get 31 of these lightweight users on that D16 SV3. Now, what I did was I let these users kind of do their tests for over an hour, and after the users logged off, then I let them keep their profiles and I ran the test again. Now this time I could see that because they don't have all of these startup services and they don't have to build their profiles, it almost doubled the number of users that I could load onto the system because the CPU wasn't getting oversaturated, okay? So there's another little you know, key learning point for you. And just to kind of give you a visual depiction of what that looks like to the CPU, what we have here is the first, you know, I think I had about 50 users that were on the system. And I was logging in those 50 users. You could see that you know, those existing users don't really demand a whole lot more CPU or anything else. But I added another 5 to that. So I went from 50 to 55. And when it created those 5 new users on the system, you can see, really get a feel for how that kind of punishes the processor. So it's an interesting learning point there. And then lastly, I'll cover the storage-based performance. So if you're familiar with storage, you'll know that write IOPS are one of the most important IOPS because that's writing new information. That information has to be protected. And it's typically, in my opinion, the weakest point of any storage subsystem. So I typically take a look at the write IOs per second. And here I found this very interesting. When it comes to doing writes on the system, I could see, number one, that the read-write ratio was extremely high. And when it's extremely high like that, the write to the read IOs, then you know you have a lot of what you need on that image already. So it's doing some read IOPS there. But because you're putting a lot of new things on the system, you're going to do a lot of write IOPS. And you know, because this is a hypervisor that's managed by Azure folks, I'm not really sure how write IOPS are being done on the back end. But anyway, you can see that the ratio of write IOPS to read IOPS is quite high. And I've seen opportunities where there have been a lot of spikes on the write ratios. Here you can see a difference of about a 200x difference between write and read operations. So Got SSD is going to be the slogan here for us as we look to really ramp up these session hosts. We don't want storage to be a bottleneck anymore. That's why we do SSD. So if you have a chance, go for the best storage you can find. There's another behavior that I saw. I've seen this at some of our customers, and I saw this in testing that I did. Every once in a while when we do a test, we'll see these random spikes, and there's no pattern to them. You can't guess where they're going to come in. We spent a lot of time troubleshooting, and it basically boiled down to the fact that there was something with Office that caused one of our little timers to get errors in their values. And it was something to do with Office, believe it or not. So if we updated our Office version to something less or something above version 1906, and again, this is an Office version, then this problem went away. So if you guys are doing testing, you know, on your platforms and you see these performance spikes, then you can certainly get rid of them by updating the version of Office. So I don't want you to get caught with that issue as well. That can definitely skew your test data. And then lastly, as I mentioned, with Login Enterprise, we have this thing called continuous testing. So it's not just doing a performance test, a benchmarking test, but it's also doing just, it's logging in a couple of users, and those users are logging in over and over and over again. They're running through their application workflows and then logging off. And they're going to continue doing that all day, all night, all week, all month, all year. And one of the cool things that we see here is that during the day, I basically ran a load test against the system to see if this little continuous testing virtual user would pick that up. And what you can see is as the system got busier, lag started to pick up. Login times picked up, and application start times and interactions also picked up. So you can see that there's the noisy neighbor syndrome here on the server itself. As that server gets busy, the users are going to feel that. The other thing that we notice is that during the normal day, if I just let that user run without any extra work on that server, then I don't really see too many differences in the performance of that system. And what I was looking for here is how does the utilization of Azure or the links that I'm connected to via Azure or anything like that, how does that saturation affect me during the day? And I can see that they've done a pretty good job of making sure that the quality of service remains the same throughout the day. You can see it's very flat here. That's good news. Okay, some lessons learned about all of this. Let's first take a look at scalability. So as I mentioned before, when we put the system under load, we found that it basically went from a good performance to a poor performance at around 47 sessions on this D16 SV3. Login performance started to fall off at about 55. So if we look at our new sizing formula, I'd say we've got a rule of about 2 or 3. If you're pretty good at optimizing a system, then I'd say, but no more than 4, okay? Microsoft, I did find, has some guidance on WVD, on Azure and WVD, and I think their guidance was very similar. For a lighter to a medium user, it was about 3 or 4. For a pretty heavy user, it was about 1 or 2. So good to see that some of their numbers agree with some of my numbers, as I've done quite a bit of testing here. There's another thing to take a look at. This one has to do with cost. So if I look at the system, I have this area where I've kind of narrowed down and called it my steady state. And steady state is basically when you ramp up and do all of those logins, again, on a client OS, it's going to make the system very busy. When you log on and do that, you're going to see the system really start to heat up. But after everybody gets logged in and the processes start to settle down a little bit, sorry about the little motorcycle noise, I told you that would happen. As the system heats up and starts to settle down a little bit, it's no longer creating profiles or doing any of the startup processes, then you can see the CPU comes down and starts to level off. And that's what I call the steady state. You can see it here on the CPU average that I got from the Azure Performance Monitor. You can also see it here in our Login VSI data that after that heat up time, when I continued to do the test, you could see it really leveled out quite a bit. And then you can see here also in some of the performance monitor data of the session host, we hit our head on the CPU, but then it quickly came down and leveled off at about 75-ish, 75% CPU utilization, which is, probably the top of where I'd want to be in any system that I'm using. So let's do some math on the money here. So if I look at the difference between 47 and 55 users, and again, looking at more of that logon pressure versus just that steady state pressure, you can see that we can start saving some money. For one user, it's about $26 per month for this 47 number. And for 55, then you're looking at about $22 per month. So let's start doing some math a little more. One user at a full year, $316 versus $270. And then we start to bump up those numbers. Let's say 1,000 users, then we're starting to look at a pretty big difference. And this is just for 1,000 users. So if you have hundreds of thousands of users, then these amounts change quite a bit, right? So there's just alone in going with a max number versus a steady state number, you can potentially have a fairly good cost savings here. So I thought it would be important to just expose you to that in case you're being put under pressure for how can I size these systems and how can I keep my costs down. So there's one place to look. The other thing that I looked at was login intervals, and I think this is probably a weak spot in WVD that Microsoft is working on for sure. And also, this is something that is going to have to change, and I have some things I'll be looking at too in the future that will measure this, I think, and we'll see a big differences here. Number one is that you can see if I had 5 seconds between each login. So user 1 logs in, 5 seconds later, user 2, 5 seconds after that, user 3. So I've got this 5-second gap between logins. Again, with these startup processes, if I pack those user logins too tightly together, you can see the responsiveness of my system skyrockets. Remember, under 2,000 is good-ish, right? Anything above that is a problematic, and this number is certainly a problem. So you can see that packing those logins really tightly can cause some problems on these systems. If I space them out about 30 seconds, we're down to a pretty good number. So somewhere around 30 seconds is ideal here. But again, I know in a lot of enterprises, we don't have the luxury of being able to tell users to wait to log in. All we can do is work with certain brokers or certain connection technologies like Citrix to kind of work on the management of those logins. Now, when we go forward, we have things like MSIX AppAttach and FS Logics with Microsoft to help to offload some of those startup processes, those profile functions, that kind of stuff that I imagine will help quite a bit here. So that remains to be determined. We'll see here pretty soon. Other things of interest that we looked at. So again, as I mentioned earlier, OneDrive per machine. There are ways you can go that are helpful links out there or articles that tell you how to make sure that's on. You can look in the registry, for example, under OneDrive and see all users install. That's going to be, and if you have a OneDrive directory like this, then you know it's been installed per machine and not per user. Again, that's going to help with the CPU. And that's already on by default on the Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session host. So you don't have to worry about that, but it's a good thing to check. Okay, app readiness is another function, and basically what that does is it starts up the applications, the Windows 10 applications ahead of time. So if I have an application that I like to use, Windows 10 wants to open that and kind of prepare it for that first time use. And of course, that's going to consume some resources on my session host. Right? Windows 10 doesn't care if you're going to use it or not. It's basically going to prepare that for a great first-time experience. Now, we're talking about the difference between maybe a 500 millisecond startup of an app and maybe a 1 second or something like that, right? So I don't know that it's really all that helpful to have the operating system start all of those up for me and prepare them in that function. So again, this is something that Microsoft pointed my eyes in the direction of, and you can see there's a reg key value called first logon delay. I set it to a really high value so that we wouldn't have to worry about those additional CPU processes. Now there's another process that also makes sure that our apps are in good order, and that's called the AppX service. It's a deployment service that looks at what Windows 10 store applications do you have installed? Are they up to date? And if they're not, they'll be updated, that kind of stuff. This is another side process that runs. And when you look at multiple sessions per server, this is running times those multiple sessions. So it's something to keep your eyes on, not necessarily something that, we need to tweak or tune, but it is one of those additional services that we kept our eyes on. And then we'll also take a look at things like Teams. There are definitely a lot more services that need to be tuned up and things like that. And I think Teams is even configurable now in a per machine type of configuration. So I think I heard that. We might need somebody to double check that for me. Why is it important to do all this testing? Well, you can see all of the components in the VDI or SVC tuning stack. That's a lot of stuff that changes, right? With Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session WVD, all of this stuff is still susceptible to changing. And with all of the things that are going on now due to the pandemic and the work from home, all of these little arrows are pointing to areas that the system is going to likely change with that new change in the way that we access the workspaces. So again, testing is extremely important here when it comes to how that changes and what the effect is going to be on our production users. Now, when you look at things like WVD or other cloud-based platforms, a lot of the stuff at the bottom of that layer cake is managed for you. So you don't really do much in terms of how you manage it. That's good because that's less work that you're going to have to do, but it's also something that you want to test and keep your eyes on, because if that cloud service provider is changing that on the back end, how do you know that it's not affecting you, right? What if the servers that I'm running on are old Broadwell or Haswell processors and I put patches on those? Is that going to slow my instances down at all? I don't know. Again, another reason to test. So with that, we always like to ask our audiences if you have a change management process within your EUC organization. So Stephanie, take it away. Okay, she put the poll up. And basically, again, do you have a change management process within your EUC organization? So I'll let you manage that one for us, Stephanie. Thank you.
Yep, looks like almost half have voted, so give them a few more seconds. By the way, I'm digging the birds in the background. I really like it.
It's like a little spa, isn't it?
It's the best webinar soundtrack I think I've ever heard.
That's awesome. And they're all real too. Welcome to the jungle.
That's great. All right, we're coming up on about a minute. Looks like over half have voted, so I'm gonna close it down in 3 seconds, 2, 1. Okay. And there's the results.
Okay, looks like almost 80% of us have some type of change management process in our EUC organization. That's great. And that's a place we've got to be, right? I mean, this is when things are changing a lot. You know, a lot of us are looking at our processes that we have and trying to figure out ways that we can accommodate the faster, intervals of products being changed on us, right? We got to test faster. We have to make changes faster. We have to absorb those changes faster. So it's not getting any easier for us. So hopefully the products that we offer can help to do that. And Login Enterprise, the latest is version 4.1. Again, we have this new feature that we added called application compatibility testing. So because we're all geeks, I thought it might be fun to do a quick demo. So before I do that, I'll just quickly cover what the 3 functions are we're going to take a look at. That's application compatibility and functional testing. So this is going to look at, is my application ready as I update the Windows OS that that application lives on? And it provides reports that help us to determine if that application is running properly after that change. And then the load testing. So this is going to take over for the Login VSI product, right? So the Login VSI product is known for its ability to load test, and Login Enterprise now has that capability as well. And then lastly, the continuous availability and performance testing is the one that is really, really great for cloud-based environments, right? How can I measure and monitor that on a consistent basis that helps me to really have a lot of clarity about how those resources are performing. So we'll take a quick look at that. And then last slide before we get into the demo is how does it all work? Because I will use some terms here that maybe you're not familiar with. So if you look at this, this emblem right here, that's the Login Enterprise Virtual Appliance. Login Enterprise Virtual Appliance is basically the brains of the operation. And we have those launchers. Again, they establish sessions to the desktop and application resource pools. So what the virtual appliance does is it sends the instructions to those launchers and says, hey, wherever you are, I want you to establish a session to those resources from that location. And it's going to spin up our Citrix receiver and make a connection to that desktop or application pool on the back end. So that's that connection that we have there. After that login happens, then what happens on the target environment is we spin up a virtual user process. And that virtual user is what logs in, records all the information, fires up the apps, works through the apps, and again, collects a bunch of information and provides it back to the Login Enterprise Virtual Appliance. So you can see kind of what's going on with your environment. Okay, so it's a virtual appliance, it's the launchers, and it's the desktop and application pools. So let's go to the demo. Okay, so thanks to TeamViewer for allowing me to make a connection to my lab that's at my cooperative workspace. We've got a virtual appliance here. That virtual appliance comes in a couple of different flavors, right? It comes in an OVA file, so you can import that into your favorite hypervisors that accept OVA, pre-built appliances, or it also comes in a VHDX file. So if you want to import that into Hyper-V, for example, you can use the VHDX file. And basically, it has everything you need installed and ready to go. All you have to do is give it a little network information, and it's ready to go. You can see that once that's done doing that install, it just gives you this really simple user interface. Now, this is not the user interface we use on a daily basis. This is just like, in a VMware hypervisor type of environment, you get the really rudimentary, maintenance menu there, but that's never anything you access on a daily basis. So I'll just close that and take you to the new web interface for Login Enterprise. So here's the login for Login Enterprise, and once we open that up, you can see we have our little home page, or you have access to everything that you need here. Now, as we look in here, there is something that this is enabling basically our virtual user technology. That virtual user, if you haven't seen, again, VSI before, that virtual user basically just loads up the system by working on the system. So it can do things that most of your human users can do by interacting with those applications, saving files, typing into files, doing a whole host of different types of interactions with those applications. So I thought that might be interesting for you to see. Again, these virtual users are very, they just get a script and they do what that script tells them to do. Very simple, and it's a good way to kind of keep this very consistent user kind of logged in and accepting information. So with that virtual user, we can do 3 different things. That's application test, load test, and continuous test again. But before we do that, we have to set up our accounts. So these are our virtual user accounts that are typically going to be in our Active Directory environment, and they will have a startup script associated with them. We don't require any agents to be installed. Just a startup script needs to fire up when these users log in. And I can create groups of those users as well. The other is launchers. Launchers, again, you saw on the other page, they basically establish a session between themselves and the target environment. And you can see I've got 4 different launchers that are enabled. To make that work, all I have to do is install the launcher on that remote system, Linux or Windows. And once that fires up, it registers with the virtual appliance, and that's all you have to do. Again, you can put it in launcher groups if you'd like. And then lastly, applications. We have a number of applications that come with the product, so you don't have to do your own. But if you'd like, you can build your own as well. So once you have those 3 components, then you head over to Manage Test, and all you have to do is say, what session host do I want to connect to? What users do I want to use? Where do I want to launch those sessions from? And you've already got a big piece of that. You can set a daily schedule for when you want that to run. You can say which applications you want to use in there, and you can order those applications into a logical workflow. And you can have it cycle through those over and over again if you'd like. And then lastly, this is a really important function of the product, and that's we want to track login successes or login failures. I want to know how long it takes to log in, and I want to set thresholds. I want to be alerted if it goes over that threshold. Same with round trip protocol latency. That's the ICA protocol latency there. And then application failures. I basically, as an operations team, want to know if any of that stuff doesn't work. And then when it comes to our applications, if those tend to take longer than usual, I want to look at a different, either starting the application or interacting with the application. I can set thresholds for those as well and be alerted if I go above those thresholds. The key thing here is that I want to know about a problem before my real users can feel that problem. So I'll set those thresholds to a little bit lower than what they would feel, so I can get in front of that problem before that really becomes a production kind of problem. So if we go back to manage test, you can see I've got continuous testing again, load testing and application testing. You basically set those all up the same way. Load testing and app testing are a one-time test. They're not a continuous test. So you basically can click start and it'll fire off those tests for you and run through them and then provide you the report. So let's just take a quick peek at the reporting. If I go to the results, first of all, you can look at the continuous test. This is the heads up display, the operations kind of center display for all of the continuous tests and the results from those tests. You can see if applications are running slow again, if they're failing, if logins are slow, or if the logins are failing, and if the round trip protocol latency is above the threshold. So, and the other thing we do is we automatically sort the problem ones to the top. So if you're looking at hundreds of these, you get the basically the problematic ones that will bubble up to the top, and you can take action on them. Some of the cool things about this are if I do get an error, with an application running, we do provide you information that helps you to quickly diagnose that. Right here, I can see that potentially this was taking too long to be able to log into the registration desk module for my EMR application. So you get a little bit of information that helps you to know where to focus your efforts. You also get information about login performance, and you can look at it in 15-minute intervals or 1-hour intervals for the continuous test. You can see I'm not going above my threshold here, so everything's good for this regional center that I'm keeping my eyes on. And then lastly, for the applications, you can see that we also, for every interaction that I have set up, starting the app, all of this stuff, I'm tracking the performance of those and have set thresholds on most of those as well. You can see what that looks like over time. So pretty cool stuff, and really helps you to get your hands around how well things are performing there with these virtual users. These very consistent users really help to narrow down on where the problems come from. So that's the continuous test results, and we can certainly look at that in terms of reports by hour, by day, by week, by month. You can start to recognize trends when you start to look at these longer ranges of time, and that's again really helpful to see if you're projecting that you might be encountering an issue sooner or later because things are slowing down. In my case, I keep my system patched, I keep it optimized, and I'm not seeing any issues with my performance week over week, so that's a good thing. I can also, again, look at logins and see how those change over time, and then latency as well. So that's the continuous test results, and you can certainly export those results as well. Application testing reports its results a little bit differently. It basically generates a report for you in a PDF format, and that report looks like this. So it'll tell you again what app failures look like, app performance looks like. You can see some of the thresholds that are being crossed here. And then you can go down to the roll-up summary of all the apps that I've tested, and I can see I had one that had a performance issue. I just click on that and I can see it took a little bit longer than usual, but this could be a case where that's acceptable to me. 13 or 130 milliseconds difference is really not that bad. So anyway, that's the kind of performance or report that you get with the application compatibility testing. And then if we look at the load testing, again, this is what is taking over for Login VSI. Then you get some cool reporting about the testing here as well. You can look at how many sessions were fired off, and you can see the effect that that had on the applications as the sessions kind of built up. Again, you kind of get that effect here, where as you log in, things slow down because of the CPU utilization. And then as it settles down, you don't see that spike up quite as badly. Also with this testing, we do collect things like login performance, and we do collect things like application execution errors. So I can see I did have some app errors. And again, you get a quick screenshot to see what's going on or why that failed, so you can address that. And maybe that can help to kind of clean up your server-based compute or WVD environment, okay? So in a nutshell, that's Login Enterprise. And last thing I'll say is that this all works with a RESTful Web API. So if you want to script using PowerShell, you can do that. You can fire off tests, you can get data, you can do a number of things through the API. So that tends to be rather helpful function. So I'm going to conclude my part of the presentation with 10 minutes left. So I do want to say thank you for letting me present to your community. You guys are really valuable to us, and it's been my pleasure. So I'll hand it back to Bas, and we can cover any questions if we had any.
Yes, we have. I hope I'll pronounce it rightly. Mo has a question about experiences with app performance. He's thinking about an issue he's seen often within RDP of ICA sessions when scrolling through large Excel files, for example. Do you know if there are any workloads within Login that simulate those problems?
Yeah, absolutely. That would be a very easy thing to do. I would, if I wanted to simulate that, I could take the built-in Excel application workload and I could modify that. So you saw in the demonstration that I create a small little table, right? It doesn't have a whole lot of data in it, but you can open an existing file if you would like that's already pre-populated, or you can have the virtual user type in, copy, paste, do whatever you want to fill up that file. And then we do have the capability to perform scrolling with our virtual user. So you could very much so simulate that, no problem. And you could time it as well. So how long does it take?
Great. And he had another mention about the rule of thumb, 5 to 10. And I think in this case, because you don't know exactly how many physical cores are available on your physical machine. So I assume you translate the rule of thumb to virtual CPUs, so 1 to 10, because the normal rule is 5 to 10.
Yeah, the normal rule is 5 to 10 for bare metal systems that I want to put a hypervisor on and use in that way. And logical processors too on that bare metal system. In Azure, yeah, you've got some more abstraction there. So it's really about discovering what those numbers are all over again, because you really don't have an idea of how that's architected on the back end.
Just for easy calculations.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, but it's let's just say it's a good place to start, right? It doesn't represent how we should size in general, because we should always test our own applications and desktops. But it's better than starting with 160 in my case, right? That could have taken a very long time to try and make that work.
And I've got another one. Let's look it up. That one is from Jeff. You've mentioned in your presentation that you found out that disabling app readiness improves log on times, but breaks universal Windows apps. How to address?
Yeah, app readiness doesn't break the UWP or the universal apps. All it does is app readiness, basically, let's just look at a single application on the Windows 10 OS, right? That application, app readiness is going to look at that and say, hey, I know my user is going to open this after they log in. So what I'm going to do is, as a part of that login process, I'm going to open it up for them and prepare it so that when they fire it up, it actually takes less time. And that it really only saves the user maybe milliseconds, right? It's not something that's going to save them like 10 or 20 seconds. So it's not really a big help. And it's okay if it takes, maybe a couple of seconds for an app to start for that user. So it doesn't really break anything.
Right, so let's see if I can find another one. They're getting in. Mario was wondering if how to compare Login enterprise performance reports with Control Up.
Sure, that's a good question, Mario. Yeah, Control Up is a good monitoring platform, right? They use an agent. They're able to look at system information. They're able to look at things from a user perspective where that agent is running. But they are monitoring real users, right? And real users can do things differently that will cause some of those values to change. And sometimes system information doesn't really tell you exactly what that's going to correlate to in terms of a user experience. So we find that in our field that some of our customers are really enjoying using Control Up with Login Enterprise. Number one, you can use Login Enterprise to load test, and Control Up will tell you how the system responds under that load test. There's great collaboration there. For the continuous testing, have Control Up monitor the Login Enterprise continuous user, and then you really get a feel for what that behavior is like, what that end user experience is like, because you have a very consistent user. You don't have a human user that's changing anything or doing anything different. So using the two together is actually quite helpful. So you have this very diverse platform in Login Enterprise, and you have this monitoring tool with Control Up. And when you use them both together, it can be a very elegant solution, and we have a number of customers doing that already.
Great. Some more questions. Can we expect some more tests with app attach, app layering, workspace environment managers? Is that something that's on your roadmap?
Yep, for sure. Actually working on that now.
Great to hear.
I think we got time for maybe one more before we hand it back to Stephanie.
Yeah, I think that's about it. Some more specific ones that we'll come back to. No, that will be it.
Right on. Thanks, Bas, for monitoring that or moderating that.
You're welcome.
And I can always send, if there were, like you said, there were some more specific questions that were very detailed, I can send those over to you, Blair,
Okay.
for quick follow-up afterwards.
Sure. And feel welcome to take the screen sharing back.
Yep, I'm gonna grab that right now. I just have a couple of slides to wrap up with. I did put the link in the chat window for you to our survey. Again, it's short and anonymous, and we just really like to get your feedback. I do want to mention our CUGC to go virtual events. Obviously, our local groups, which we have over 75 around the world, we can't meet in person, but we can certainly all come together online. So here are some of the upcoming meetings, and the really cool part is you don't have to live there to attend. So you can also experience what a different group is like in a different city. And obviously the picture shows go to happy hour. They're not all just about happy hour. They are, technical presentations that happen, but they're also fun and they're about building community. So definitely check out our events calendar to see which meetings are coming up and which ones you'd like to join. And with that, I just have one more slide as a reminder that those of you who opted in for a chance to win a pair of Apple AirPods, we will choose the winner at random offline and we'll announce the winner on Twitter. So make sure you follow us at MyCUGC to find out who that is. And also make sure you visit us at mycugc.org. If you haven't been there in a while or you've never been, we've got lots of great resources for you, our local groups and meeting information, other webinars. Today's webinar, we'll be posting the recording there for you, in addition to the email that you'll get. Lots of great technical blogs and forums. So if you have questions or if you have answers to other people's questions, that's a great place for you to go. So hope to see you all there soon. And with that, I think I'll give you all back to your day. I hope you all stay safe. And I just want to thank Blair and Bas for being with us today and thank all the
My
birds
pleasure.
for chirping.
Yeah, welcome to the jungle.
It was awesome. All right, thanks again. I hope you all have a great day and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Take care.
Thanks all.